Early life and the search for belonging. Jimmy D's transformation from college football player to the most notorious betrayer in pagan history began on quiet nights behind a Philadelphia gas station counter in 1972. Working the 3 a.m. shift to pay for school, he encountered members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club rolling in after bars closed. But Jimmy's attraction to outlaw culture wasn't just about rebellion. It was about finding a family structure he'd never had. Growing up in a broken home with an absent father and struggling mother, the Pagans offered what mainstream society couldn't: unconditional brotherhood, clear rules, and a sense of purpose. What started as casual interactions with these leather-clad outlaws evolved into something deeper when a pagan named Snake recognized Jimmy's hunger for real brotherhood. Jimmy abandoned his college future and football dreams to join a world that promised one for all for one, a bond supposedly stronger than blood, built on loyalty and violence in equal measure. The pagan code and outlaw philosophy. The pagans weren't typical bikers seeking recognition or community goodwill. They called themselves one-percenters, rejects of society's rules who live by their own code. Do unto others, then split. This philosophy extended beyond simple lawlessness. It was a complete rejection of mainstream American values. While society preached conformity, the pagans embraced chaos. While the establishment promoted peaceful resolution, they solved problems with fists and weapons. Philadelphia was their fortress, and they made sure every other club, the Warlocks, the Breed, the Wheels of Soul, knew this was pagan territory. For Jimmy, violence became routine, not exceptional. His jacket wasn't just clothing, but a record of barroom brawls, inter-club wars, and street fights that defined everyday life as a pagan. The Brotherhood promised no one fought alone, and initially, that promise felt unbreakable. The chemistry of power, mastering methamphetamine. Production. By the late 1970s, Jimmy had evolved from soldier to invaluable asset through his mastery of methamphetamine production. Learning from rock and roll, a mob-connected chemist, Jimmy discovered that knowledge could be more powerful than muscle in the outlaw world. His scientific approach to drug manufacturing set him apart from typical pagan brutality. Jimmy created Pagan Purple, meth so pure it became the club's signature product, recognizable across the East Coast criminal underworld. Only he knew the exact purity levels and cutting methods before distribution. The Mother Club received his pure product and systematically diluted it through their network, turning purple crystal to dark pink, to light pink to white as it moved through 44 chapters, stretching from Pennsylvania to South Carolina. This distribution system wasn't just about drugs. It was about power, territory, and the economics of outlaw life. The economics of outlaw brotherhood. Jimmy's meth operation revealed the complex financial structure underlying Pagan Brotherhood. The club operated like a corporation, with the Mother Club as executives, chapter presidents as middle management, and regular members as foot soldiers. Drug profits funded everything from legal defense funds to weapons purchases to territorial expansion. But this economic success created internal tensions. Who really controlled the organization? The patch-wearing leaders or the man cooking the drugs that funded everything? Jimmy's increasing influence through his chemical expertise began challenging traditional pagan power structures, creating resentment among members who valued violence over intellect. Territorial wars and strategic violence power inevitably attracted enemies, and Jimmy found himself at the center of wars with both the Philadelphia Mafia and Hell's Angels. In 1981, mob boss Mickey Scarfo demanded the pagans pay a street tax for operating in his city. This wasn't just about money, it was about establishing dominance in America's criminal hierarchy. Jimmy's response was characteristically violent. He kidnapped 2 made men and drove them through downtown Philadelphia at gunpoint. When one tried to escape near police officers having coffee, Jimmy shot him in broad daylight in front of uniformed cops. This wasn't random violence, but calculated intimidation designed to establish that the pagans wouldn't be subordinated to traditional organized crime families. Corruption and law enforcement complicity. Jimmy's ability to post just $750 bail for the downtown shooting revealed Philadelphia's endemic corruption during the 1970s and 80s. The Pagans had cultivated relationships throughout the police department, prosecutors' offices, and court system. This wasn't unusual. Organized crime groups had long understood that corrupting officials was more effective than fighting them. Jimmy personally knew which cops could be bought, which prosecutors would look the other way, and which judges would minimize sentences. This corruption network allowed the Pagans to operate with near impunity, making them feel invincible and above the law. The psychology of betrayal. The betrayal that destroyed Jimmy's world came from within prison walls in 1982. Locked up after the mob shooting, he learned from his lawyer that 3 fellow Pagans, Weasel, Crow, and Viper, had secretly conspired with the Philadelphia Mafia. For merely $10,000, they gave the mob permission to kill the man who had cooked their meth, fought their battles, and defended their territory. The psychological impact went beyond anger or fear. It was a complete shattering of Jimmy's worldview. He had genuinely believed in pagan brotherhood, sacrificing normal relationships, career prospects, and personal safety for the club. Discovering that his own brothers had literally put a price on his head, and such a small price at that, revealed that everything he'd believed about loyalty was an illusion. The decision to cooperate faced with the ultimate violation of brotherhood, Jimmy made the decision that would forever brand him as the ultimate traitor in pagan history. "If they didn't give me up, I'd still be a pagan today," he later reflected. "I would have went to prison and kept my mouth shut and came back out in good standing. Them giving me up caused me to do what I did." This decision wasn't made lightly. It represented a complete philosophical transformation. Jimmy had to reconcile his deep belief in loyalty with the reality that loyalty hadn't been reciprocated. He began cooperating with federal authorities, providing detailed information about the Pagans' inner structure, meth operations, and Mother Club leadership. Federal investigation and RICO prosecutions. Jimmy's testimony became the foundation for 2 major RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt, Organizations Act cases that specifically targeted and devastated the organization's top tier. RICO laws, originally designed to combat traditional mafia families, proved equally effective against outlaw motorcycle clubs. Federal prosecutors used Jimmy's insider knowledge to map the Pagans' organizational structure, document their criminal activities, and prove the systematic nature of their operations. His testimony revealed how the club operated as a criminal enterprise, not just a motorcycle group that happened to break laws. The cases resulted in dozens of convictions and effectively decapitated pagan leadership. The informant lifestyle and witness protection. Becoming a federal informant meant entering a shadow world of assumed identities, constant relocation, and perpetual fear. Jimmy had to learn to trust federal agents while knowing his former brothers wanted him dead. The witness protection program offered physical safety but psychological isolation. He could never return to Philadelphia, never contact old friends, never visit familiar places. The program's restrictions meant abandoning not just his criminal past, but his entire identity. Every relationship became potentially dangerous. Every public appearance a security risk. Impact on the pagan organization. The aftermath of Jimmy's cooperation left lasting scars on the Pagans organization. Federal indictments shattered leadership continuity, forcing rapid promotion of inexperienced members to fill vacant positions. The club's drug operations were disrupted, reducing their primary income source. Paranoia infected remaining members as everyone wondered who might be the next informant. The organization's expansion stalled, while rivals like the Hells Angels consolidated territory. Internal discipline broke down as traditional command structures collapsed under legal pressure. Media coverage and public perception. Jimmy's story became a media sensation, representing the archetypal outlaw-turned-informant narrative that fascinated the public. Television documentaries, newspaper articles, and true crime books explored his transformation from loyal brother to federal witness. This media attention served dual purposes. It satisfied public curiosity about outlaw culture while reinforcing law enforcement's message that criminal organizations could be penetrated and destroyed from within. However, the coverage often oversimplified complex loyalty issues, presenting Jimmy's decision in black and white moral terms rather than acknowledging the gray areas of survival and betrayal. The Hells Angels rivalry. Jimmy's cooperation occurred during intensifying conflict between the Pagans and Hells Angels, America's premier outlaw motorcycle organizations. The Hells Angels, larger and more internationally connected, viewed East Coast expansion as inevitable. The Pagans, smaller but fiercely territorial, saw this as an existential threat. Jimmy's testimony weakened the Pagans at precisely the moment they needed strength to resist Hells Angels' encroachment. This timing wasn't coincidental. Federal authorities understood that crippling one organization would benefit their investigations into others, creating a domino effect of prosecutions, family and personal relationships. Jimmy's decision to cooperate destroyed not just his criminal relationships, but his entire social network. Family members faced ostracism and potential violence for their connection to an informant. Old girlfriends, drinking buddies, and even casual acquaintances became security risks. The outlaw world's code extended beyond club members. Anyone who maintained contact with an informant faced suspicion and potential retaliation. This social isolation compounded Jimmy's psychological struggles, reinforcing his dependence on federal handlers, who became his only consistent human contact. The long-term legacy, Jimmy D's legacy, remains contradictory decades later. To law enforcement, he was a crucial asset whose information crippled one of America's most violent motorcycle clubs and provided a template for future investigations. His cooperation demonstrated that even the most dedicated criminals could be turned under the right circumstances. To the Pagans and outlaw culture generally, he represents the ultimate betrayal, the man who broke the sacred code of silence for personal survival. His name became a warning used to discipline members who showed signs of wavering loyalty. Philosophical questions about loyalty and survival. Jimmy's story raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of loyalty in criminal organizations. If brotherhood could be purchased for $10,000, was it ever real? When survival conflicts with loyalty, which takes precedence? His case challenged. Romanticized notions of honor among thieves, revealing that criminal loyalty often had price tags. The story forced examination of whether betraying betrayers was itself a form of justice or simply another level of betrayal. Contemporary relevance. Jimmy D's transformation from loyal member to federal informant remains relevant to understanding modern criminal organizations. Law enforcement agencies continue using similar tactics against drug cartels, street gangs, and terrorist organizations. The psychological dynamics he experienced, initial loyalty, growing disillusionment, ultimate betrayal, and survival-driven cooperation, represent patterns that repeat across different criminal contexts. His story serves as both a case study in successful investigation techniques and a cautionary tale about the human costs of infiltrating criminal organizations. The continuing hunt today, Jimmy D's name serves as both warning and symbol in outlaw circles. Some view him as a survivor who refused to die for men who had already abandoned him. Others see him as the ultimate traitor who destroyed something sacred for personal gain. The Pagans' hit list presumably remains active, making Jimmy a permanent target despite decades of cooperation and relocation. This perpetual threat represents the lasting consequences of crossing the outlaw world. Forgiveness isn't part of their code, and memories in criminal organizations tend to be very long. Law enforcement revolution. Jimmy D's case became a revolutionary template for federal investigations into organized crime. FBI agent Collins, who handled Jimmy's cooperation, later explained to new recruits how the case changed everything. Jimmy D proved that loyalty in criminal organizations is often one way. Leaders expect it from members, but don't always provide it in return. The Jimmy D model became standard practice. Identify the indispensable member, wait for their organization to betray them, then offer survival in exchange for comprehensive information. Law enforcement training facilities worldwide now study his case as the perfect example of how to flip a high-value target. Organizational paranoia and internal destruction. The lasting damage to the Pagans organization extended far beyond immediate prosecutions. Razor, the former Philadelphia chapter president, now serving life in prison, reflected bitterly on the aftermath. Jimmy destroyed more than just operations, he destroyed trust. Now every member suspects every other member. The paranoia is eating us alive from the inside. The new pagan leadership implemented brutal internal discipline measures, requiring constant loyalty tests and eliminating members based on mere suspicion. This paranoid culture made the organization less effective and more fractured, proving that Jimmy's betrayal had created wounds that never fully healed. Academic and criminological analysis universities and research institutions embraced Jimmy D's case as a perfect study in organizational loyalty and betrayal. Criminology professors use his story to illustrate fundamental weaknesses in all criminal organizations: their dependence on human loyalty, despite humans being ultimately self-interested. Psychology researchers studying organizational betrayal found that Jimmy's experience demonstrated how loyalty becomes conditional, even in groups claiming it's absolute. When an organization betrays a member first, it removes that member's moral obligation to remain loyal. The case became required reading in criminal justice programs and continues influencing academic understanding of criminal behavior. Psychological aftermath and therapy. Decades after his cooperation, Jimmy continues struggling with the psychological consequences of his choices. In therapy sessions, he reflects on the complexity of his decision. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the men I called brothers valued my life at $10,000. But cooperating? That saved my life." When asked about the lives destroyed by his testimony, he becomes defensive. "They destroyed their own lives. I just provided the evidence." This ongoing internal conflict reveals the lasting psychological damage inflicted by the betrayal cycle. Jimmy was simultaneously victim and perpetrator, survivor and destroyer. Impact on victims and families. Jimmy's cooperation created complex moral questions for families affected by pagan drug operations. One mother whose son died from Pagan Purple meth explained, "Jimmy D's meth destroyed my son's life, but his testimony also stopped the pipeline that was destroying other families. I don't know if that makes him a hero or a villain." This ambivalence reflects the broader societal struggle to categorize informants. Were they necessary evils serving justice, or simply criminals betraying other criminals for personal benefit? The families impacted by both pagan crimes and subsequent prosecutions found themselves caught between competing claims of justice and revenge. Strategic benefits for rival organizations. Hell's Angels members privately acknowledged that Jimmy's betrayal served their strategic interest perfectly. As one Hell's Angel reflected, "Jimmy D did us a favor. The pagans were our biggest obstacle on the East Coast. His betrayal opened doors we couldn't break down with violence." This unintended consequence of Jimmy's cooperation demonstrates how individual acts of betrayal can reshape entire criminal landscapes. The Hell's Angels capitalized on pagan weakness to expand territory, recruit former pagan members, and establish dominance in markets previously contested. Jimmy's personal survival decision inadvertently assisted his former enemies' strategic goals. Prison perspectives and continuing resentment. The three pagans who originally betrayed Jimmy, Weasel, Crow, and Viper, remain unrepentant about their decision. Weasel, now in maximum security isolation, maintains, "Jimmy calls us traitors, but he's the one who broke the code. We made a business decision. He made it personal by talking to the feds." This perspective reveals the fundamental disconnect in how different parties interpreted the betrayal cycle. The original betrayers saw their actions as pragmatic business decisions, while Jimmy's cooperation represented an unforgivable violation of sacred codes. Neither side acknowledges the other's moral justifications. Generational impact and family consequences. Jimmy's betrayal affected not just his generation, but future ones. Former Mother Club members warned their children about the dangers of misplaced loyalty, using Jimmy as a cautionary example. One imprisoned leader told his son, "Real loyalty goes both ways." The pagans learned that the hard way when Jimmy D showed them what happens when you betray someone who knows all your secrets. This generational transmission of the Jimmy D story ensures his legacy continues influencing outlaw culture decades after the original events. Physical destruction and abandoned territory. The concrete consequences of Jimmy's testimony remain visible across the East Coast. Former pagan strongholds sit empty and deteriorating, seized by federal authorities or abandoned when chapters dissolved. Some chapters never recovered from the prosecutions his cooperation enabled. Their clubhouses were seized, assets frozen, and members scattered to other organizations or straight life. These physical ruins serve as monuments to the destructive power of internal betrayal, reminding surviving pagans of the consequences when loyalty collapses. Research applications in behavioral psychology. Modern behavioral psychologists continue studying Jimmy's case to understand how individuals justify betraying groups they once served loyally. Researchers found that his experience illustrates a common pattern. When organizations betray members first, those members often experience psychological permission to retaliate through counter-betrayal. This research has applications beyond criminal organizations, helping understand corporate whistleblowing, military defections, and political party switching. Jimmy's psychological journey provides a template for understanding how loyalty transforms into opposition when trust is violated. International law enforcement applications. Jimmy D's case influenced international law enforcement strategies against organized crime worldwide. The techniques developed during his cooperation, careful cultivation of informants, protection programs for cooperating witnesses, systematic mapping of criminal organizations through insider information, became standard practices adopted by law enforcement agencies globally. His story is taught in police academies from Europe to Asia as an example of how patient investigation and proper informant handling can destroy seemingly impenetrable criminal organizations. The underground economy and financial networks. Jimmy's meth operation revealed the sophisticated financial networks underlying Outlaw Motorcycle Club operations. The Pagans developed complex money laundering systems involving legitimate businesses, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency precursors that predated modern digital currencies by decades. Jimmy's chemistry expertise made him privy to the club's entire financial ecosystem, from raw material procurement through international suppliers to retail distribution networks spanning multiple states. The organization operated restaurants, auto repair shops, and tattoo parlors as fronts for drug money, creating a parallel economy that employed hundreds of people who weren't directly involved in criminal activities. When Jimmy cooperated with federal authorities, he provided detailed financial records that exposed this underground economy, leading to the seizure of millions in assets and the closure of dozens of legitimate businesses that had unknowingly facilitated drug money laundering. The financial intelligence he provided revolutionized how law enforcement understood the economic complexity of outlaw organizations, proving they weren't just street gangs, but sophisticated criminal enterprises with business acumen rivaling legitimate corporations. International connections and global drug trade. Jimmy's position as the Pagans' premier meth cook gave him unique insight into the club's international connections and participation in global drug trafficking networks. The precursor chemicals for his Pagan Purple came from suppliers in Mexico, Canada, and Asia, requiring complex smuggling operations and international criminal partnerships. Jimmy worked directly with chemical suppliers who served multiple criminal organizations, creating a web of relationships that extended far beyond American borders. His cooperation revealed how American outlaw motorcycle clubs served as crucial links in international drug trafficking chains, importing raw materials and exporting finished products to criminal organizations worldwide. The Pagans maintained relationships with Mexican cartels, Canadian biker gangs, and European criminal syndicates, participating in a global economy of violence and drug distribution. When Jimmy testified about these international connections, his information led to coordinated international law enforcement operations that disrupted drug trafficking networks across multiple continents. His betrayal didn't just damage one American motorcycle club, it sent shockwaves through international criminal organizations that had relied on Pagan Purple as a premium product in global drug markets. The role of women in outlaw culture. Jimmy's experience within the Pagans revealed the complex and often exploitative role of women in outlaw motorcycle culture. Women associated with the club, known as old ladies, property, or mamas, occupied subordinate positions that reflected both the hyper-masculine culture of the organization and broader societal gender dynamics of the 1970s and 80s. These women often served as drug couriers, money launderers, and intelligence gatherers while being denied full membership and decision-making power within the organization. Jimmy witnessed how women were simultaneously valued for their contributions and devalued as second-class participants in outlaw culture. Some women developed significant influence through their relationships with high-ranking members, creating informal power networks that operated parallel to official club hierarchies. When Jimmy cooperated with federal authorities, many women associated with the Pagans faced prosecution for their roles in drug operations, challenging stereotypes about female participation in organized crime. His testimony revealed how these women navigated between victimization and agency, often making strategic choices to protect themselves and their families within a culture that offered limited options for female empowerment. Evolution of drug manufacturing and chemical innovation. Jimmy's expertise as a methamphetamine manufacturer placed him at the forefront of chemical innovation in illegal drug production during the late 20th century. His creation of Pagan Purple represented a significant advancement in methamphetamine synthesis, combining pharmaceutical-grade purity with distinctive coloring that served as both quality assurance and brand marketing. Jimmy's scientific approach to drug manufacturing influenced an entire generation of illegal chemists who studied his techniques and attempted to replicate his success. His methods bridged traditional illegal drug production with modern pharmaceutical chemistry, incorporating quality control measures and consistent production standards that were unprecedented in street-level drug manufacturing. When legitimate pharmaceutical companies began tightening security around precursor chemicals, Jimmy developed alternative synthesis pathways that became industry standards among illegal manufacturers. His cooperation with federal authorities provided unprecedented insight into the evolution of illegal drug chemistry, helping law enforcement understand how criminal organizations adapted to regulatory changes and law enforcement pressure through chemical innovation. The intelligence he provided continues influencing Drug Enforcement Administration strategies for monitoring and controlling precursor chemicals used in illegal drug production. Cultural impact in mythology and outlaw subculture. Jimmy D's story transcended individual biography to become foundational mythology within outlaw motorcycle culture, serving as both cautionary tale and cultural touchstone that continues shaping how criminal organizations understand loyalty, betrayal, and survival. His name entered the lexicon of outlaw culture as a synonym for ultimate betrayal, used to discipline members and reinforce organizational codes across different criminal groups. The story of the most pagan who became the ultimate informant spawned countless variations, interpretations, and lessons that propagated through prison systems, clubhouses, and criminal networks nationwide. Different outlaw organizations developed their own versions of the Jimmy D narrative, often adapting details to reflect their specific cultural values and historical experiences. His story became a teaching tool used by criminal leaders to illustrate the consequences of betrayal while simultaneously warning about the dangers of betraying loyal members. The mythology surrounding Jimmy D influenced everything from recruitment practices to internal discipline procedures, as criminal organizations sought to prevent their own Jimmy D scenarios through improved loyalty verification and member retention strategies. Academic researchers studying criminal subcultures found that Jimmy's story had achieved legendary status comparable to folk heroes in legitimate cultures, demonstrating how criminal organizations create and maintain their own moral universes through shared narratives about loyalty, betrayal, and the ultimate meaning of brotherhood in outlaw life. Final reflections and ultimate assessment. In his final interviews, an aging Jimmy D provides his ultimate assessment of the choices that defined his life. They called me the most pagan in the world. Maybe I was, and maybe that's why my betrayal hurt so much. Because if someone like me could turn, then the whole thing was built on sand. When asked about regrets, he pauses thoughtfully before responding. I regret believing in something that wasn't real. I regret wasting years of my life for people who saw me as expendable. But cooperating with the feds, that kept me alive. And sometimes staying alive is all that matters. The enduring legacy of broken brotherhood. Jimmy D disappeared into witness protection over 40 years ago, but his impact continues reverberating through both law enforcement and criminal organizations. The Pagans survived his betrayal, but never fully recovered, remaining significantly weakened compared to their 1970s prominence. His name remains a curse word in outlaw circles, proof that even the most sacred codes can shatter when tested by betrayal, survival, and the simple human desire to live another day. Law enforcement agencies worldwide continue using the Jimmy D template to penetrate criminal organizations, while those same organizations struggle with the paranoia and internal suspicion his betrayal introduced to outlaw culture. His story ultimately reveals that criminal loyalty, despite romantic portrayals in popular culture, often crumbles when tested by genuine adversity. The man who once embodied pagan values proved that those values were more fragile than anyone wanted to admit, leaving a legacy that continues influencing both sides of the law enforcement criminal divide decades after his original choice between loyalty and survival.